is extremely important from a clinical perspective about what's happening in terms of Turner syndrome. And we're going to talk about the entirety of the disease, starting from genetics to clinical parameters, how we have had changes in terms of pathophysiology, evaluation, assessment, and management. And this is one condition which is very common, but unfortunately, there are a lot of issues which cause confusions in that regards. Year-old girl with growth failure who presented to a pediatrician basically with growth failure and was found to be short and was found to have a weight also which was compromised. And further evaluation showed a TSH level which was basically slightly high. She was started on eltroxin, but there was no clinical response. And subsequent to that was referred with complaints of growth concern. Now, this is a case which clearly we have got significant short stature. The TSH is high and you think the diagnosis is made. But what is important to understand is that there are many other conditions which may actually attribute to hypothyroidism. So we have seen cases who have celiac disease who have just found to have hypothyroidism and further workup was not done. This happened to be a Turner syndrome who actually had very subtle features of Turner syndrome. So very importantly, while you are diagnosing hypothyroidism, you have to be a bit more cautious, and this turned out to actually be a Turner syndrome. So any short girl, always consider the possibility of Turner syndrome because there are huge implications in terms of evaluation and management which are there. 12-year-old girl with growth failure, again, height is compromised, weight is less, there is no breast development, no pubertal development, typical features, brachymetacarpia and webbing. This is a classical case, and you will say, if you see this case, there is basically webbing of neck, there's wide carrying angle, shield chest, and you will say this is Turner syndrome without any confusion. Now, what happened was that FSH was found to be elevated and growth hormone was started. But unfortunately, this girl did not take growth hormone. That is one aspect because there are a lot of cost issues as well. But she came back 3 years later to us. So this was evaluation done by another center. And when she came back to us, there was an abdominal lump. And this happened to be a Turner syndrome with a Y cell line. Now, we all know that if there is a Y cell line, there is an 8 to 10% chance of having a gonadoblastoma, which may further develop into a malignancy. So in this case, while a diagnosis was established, which is okay, but we did not carry it forward with karyotype. So there are issues in terms of not only diagnosis, but also evaluation, which become significantly important in that perspective to identify in that regards. So Turner syndrome is one of the most common sex chromosome aneuploidies. In fact, one of the most common in girls, 1 in 2,500. It has got a wide spectrum of presentation, and Pratik will talk about how when we should consider that situation. It is often delayed at missed. Even in the developed nations, the average age of diagnosis is around 8-9 years, which is pretty late. In our country, it will be probably like 12 years, so it is quite late. And there are lifelong implications with regards to the heart, the kidney, the eyes, the ears, the autoimmunity. You can have a look at our website, Learning Doctor Society, which has got a lot of information about that. This webinar will also be posted there in the webinar section. So you can go and have a look subsequently on individual videos. From there, you can have a look at our masterclass in pediatric endocrinology, which covers the entirety of pediatric endocrinology, now approximately 100 modules, using a number of factors. We've got a postgraduate course also, which is a 3-year course for postgraduates. And we've got the books which are available, the MedEClasses books. And just this week, we have published the Indian Journal of Pediatrics, Practical Pediatric Endocrinology book, which is a book which is basically there for guidance with regards to specific management on 30 pediatric endocrine disorders. And there's a MedEClasses application available on endocrinology and pediatrics, both in the iOS and Android, which provides very easy way of assessing and managing these disorders. So Turner syndrome would be a program which will basically try to cover a number of factors. We'll start off with the basics, basically how the genetics works, how we evaluate and how it has implications. Then Dr. Pratik will talk about pointers and criteria, followed by a bit of assessment, which Navin will carry forward. Then I'll talk a bit again about growth hormone and cardiac issue. Then Dr. Sain will discuss about what's latest with regards to puberty. And then we have got a big number of cases which will really help us interact.
With the Turner syndrome, include careful and complete evaluation for the presence of other comorbidities and its complication. The complete evaluation of a child with Turner syndrome includes clinical, laboratory, and thorough cardiovascular evaluation. First, clinical evaluation. With respect to clinical evaluation, we need to do it during every clinical visit and as soon as the diagnosis of a Turner syndrome is being made. First and most important is the growth, which is being affected universally in all patients of Turner syndrome. We need to have a complete assessment of the various growth parameters, and we need to plot the growth with respect to both the IAP and WHO and also with respect to Turner's chart. The most important aspect is that whenever we file a child who is growing less with respect to that of a Turner chart, we need to think of other comorbid conditions such as celiac disease and hypothyroidism. And whenever if a child is growing less than 5 percentile on IAP on standard growth chart, we need to think for a possibility of giving growth hormone therapy. And it has to be started as soon as the diagnosis is made, and it has to be done during every clinical visit and also at least in a minimum period of every 6 months. Next important assessment in case of a child with Turner syndrome includes assessment of the pubertal status. We need to start as soon as after child has attained around 10 years of age, and we need to look for any discrepancy between the adrenal and the hypothalamo-pituitary gonadal axis, or the discrepancy between the pubic hair development and also the breast development. And third, hearing. We need to have a clinical examination regarding is there any association with infection in the form of any ear discharge, or you need to look for the presence of any throat infection, because ear infections or middle ear infection is considered to be more common in a child with Turner syndrome, and good assessment and thorough and aggressive management of these infections can prevent the development of conductive hearing loss. And hearing assessment, which includes the evaluation for sensorineural hearing defects, should be done every 3 yearly. And the most important part of assessment as soon as the diagnosis of Turner syndrome is made is the monitoring of peripheral pulses and blood pressure. We need to look for all the peripheral pulses, whether they are palpable, so as not to miss coarctation of aorta. And the most important and the mandatory thing is to recording of blood pressure. It has to be done and via the manual sphygmomanometer rather than using a electronic, because there is increased chance of development of error with respect to electronic sphygmomanometer. And most important, at least during once or in the beginning of diagnosis, we need to monitor all the 4 limbs to look for the presence of asymmetric blood pressure or hypertension. As asymmetric blood pressure could occur in coarctation of aorta, so it should not be missed out during a routine clinical examination. And hypertension is also considered to be more common with children of Turner syndrome, and it is one of the important risk factors for the development of aortic dissection. We should not miss monitoring of blood pressure during every clinical visit. And next requires the eye examination. It has to be started after 1 year and has to be done every 3 years. And already mentioned by Pratiksha, we need to look for the presence of refractive errors, which is in the form of myopia, hypermetropia, amblyopia, and look for other structural defects such as ptosis. And also you need to look for various complications such as glaucoma, cataract, and retinal detachment. And colphocoliosis examination usually starts only after 5 years of age, and it is more when the patient is on growth hormone therapy. Next comes the laboratory investigation. Here we need to look for 3 important profiles with respect to laboratory, which is the autoimmune, metabolic, and imaging. This will be explained in the following slides. And as Sarah has already mentioned, DEXA scan, which is usually done only after the child has attained the adult height and estrogen treatment for the fusion of the bone has completed. Because if we actually do it before 18 years of age, we will overestimate low bone mass. And it has to be done every 5 years after the child has attained the adult height and the estrogen treatment for bone fusion has been complete. Next, it is very important that we need to supplement vitamin D on a regular basis, and assessment can be done every 2 to 3 yearly. And dental examination should start after around 7 years of age, and we need to look for malocclusion, micrognathia, as they are more prone for many dental abnormalities. The most important aspect in a child with Turner syndrome is the cardiac workup. The cardiac workup is more important because the most common cause of morbidity and mortality in a child with Turner syndrome is the cardiovascular complications, which is the aortic dissection, which is the most common, which is about 100 times more common in a child with Turner syndrome with respect to that of the general population. So whenever a child is being diagnosed with a Turner syndrome, first and foremost, which I already mentioned, is to monitor the forelimb blood pressure to rule out coarctation of aorta and also hypertension. Then we need to do an ECG, as Pratik sir has already mentioned, various ECG abnormalities with respect to conduction abnormality in the form of short PR interval, right axis deviation. If a child who is having right axis deviation, then we could probably think of doing a cardiac MRI to rule out pulmonary venous defect or any partial anomalous pulmonary venous communication. And ECG usually done at the baseline, and in case of is there any abnormality, then we need to do it on a routine basis, or else a baseline ECG is important. And another abnormality with respect to ECG is prolonged QT interval, and azithromycin being commonly prescribed in the COVID era, it is one of the important drugs which can cause prolonged QT interval. So it is always mandatory to have a ECG checkup at the time of diagnosis in children with Turner syndrome. Next important thing is imaging. We need to do two types of imaging, which is more important. First is the 2D echo. 2D echo, which basically is usually done in younger children and also in infancy. And other important thing is the MRI, which is to be done after 12 years of age to rule out aortic dilatation. And this MRI has to be repeated based on the risk for development of aortic dissection. 2D echo is basically done to rule out various cardiovascular abnormality, which Pratik sir has mentioned in detail. They have bicuspid aortic wall, coarctation of aorta, and other abnormalities. But MRI is considered to be more specific for identification of aortopathy rather than 2D echo. That's why we usually prefer doing an MRI after 12 years of age. And the follow-up depends on the aortic size and also depends on the various risk factors. And the follow-up has to be done either 5 years or 1 year or every 6 monthly. It is based on the risk factors. And whenever if you are planning pregnancy or during pregnancy, a complete cardiovascular workup has to be done, because the risk of development of life-threatening complication during pregnancy is very high. Approach to cardiac management. As already mentioned, we need to do the basic workup, which includes the ECG, 2D echo, MRI, and BP. And on the basis of the above results from ECG, echo, MRI, and BP, the important risk factors for the development of aortic dissection include the coarctation of aorta, bicuspid aortic wall, and hypertension. Apart from this risk factor, the most important determining factor for the development of aortic dissection is the aortic size. So based on these two factors, we usually delineate the patients with mild, moderate, and severe risk, and we generally follow up the patient on the basis of severity. In a patient with no risk factors and aortic size which is less than 3 standard deviation, then he has a very small risk of developing aortic dissection, and we need to do a MRI every 5 yearly or an echo every 5 yearly. If a patient has no risk factors but aortic size is more than 3 standard deviation, then he has a moderate risk of developing aortic dissection, and we need to monitor do a cardiac MRI every yearly. And the patient is having a aortic size of less than 3 standard deviation, but with the presence of risk factors, then also we need to monitor every 1 yearly. In a patient with both the presence of risk factors and aortic size more than 3 standard deviation, then he has a very high risk of developing aortic dissection, and he has to be done followed up every 6 monthly with 2D echo and cardiac MRI. And the other conditions which are basically associated with Turner syndrome includes the renal manifestation, which, as Anurag sir has already mentioned, because of the presence of lymphedema, there is a difficulty in the ascent of kidney during embryological development. So as a result of which, there are various anomalies which include the horseshoe kidney, duplication of the renal calyces, renal pelvis defect, and unilateral renal agenesis. Whenever when we do a USG and whenever we find a defect, we need to follow up them on a regular basis in the form of doing a yearly renal function test and yearly USG to look for any obstruction and presence of pyelonephritis and scarring of kidneys. And ENT issues. ENT issues, as Sarah has already mentioned, due to the abnormality of the skull bone development, and also there is an abnormality in the eustachian tube and the middle layer, there's an increased risk of developing recurrent middle ear infections, which will land up into development of perforation and finally end up in cholesteatoma, which cause profound conductive hearing loss. As because of the congenital anomaly in the cochlear development, these patients already have an increased risk of developing sensorineural hearing loss. When this is being compounded by the conductive hearing loss, the hearing loss becomes too severe, and they usually require the use of cochlear implant when they are becoming adults. So to prevent the development of sensorineural hearing loss, we can monitor the patient on a clinical basis and do routine evaluation of the ears so as to prevent the middle ear perforation and cholesteatoma. And the sensorineural hearing loss, which usually occurs in the adult age group, is usually in the frequency of between 1000 to 2000 hertz. As I already mentioned, the cause of conducting hair, which usually occurs during childhood, is the recurrent infection and palatal abnormality, and the cochlear defect, which is responsible for the sensorineural hearing loss. And this auto ENT issues are more common with children with classic picture of Turner syndrome, and also with ISOQ karyotyping. And complication requires surgery and cholesteatoma. Gastrointestinal. This is a very rare complication with respect to gastrointestinal. There is an increased risk of development of hemangioma and telangiectasia, which can cause profound GI bleeding, which sometimes requires surgery, where we need to do intestinal resection. And as already mentioned, there are various autoimmune diseases which are associated with Turner syndrome, and one of the most common, which we need to suspect when a child is growing below the level of Turner's chart, then celiac disease has to be suspected. And in IBD also has to be suspected in a adolescent child who is presenting with a classic feature of delayed puberty and failure to thrive, apart from various gastrointestinal manifestation. And the risk of developing celiac disease is around 2.5% in a children with Turner syndrome, and IBD is around 3%. Liver, there's mild transaminitis, which is causing a mild elevation in SGOT and SGPT levels. But as such, in contrary, replacement with estrogen generally causes decline in these levels. And autoimmunity, one of the most important autoimmune conditions, is the autoimmune thyroid disease, which is generally seen around 15% of children with Turner syndrome. So we need to start monitoring as early as possible, and this monitoring of thyroid function has to be done annually and has to be done throughout life, and has to be include the thyroid function test. And as Sarah has already mentioned, it is more common with ISOQ. And gastrointestinal, and this is already mentioned in the previous slide, and rheumatology is variable and the exact association is not known. And metabolic issues, there's an increased chance of developing diabetes mellitus, but it is both type 1 and type 2, which are both common, but the exact cause is multifactorial. If the X deletion is being maternally inherited, then there's increased chance of developing adiposity, which could lead to insulin resistance. So one of the other factors also includes the various growth hormone, estrogen replacement therapy, which also cause an abnormality in carbohydrate metabolism, which could land up in type 1 and type 2 diabetes mellitus. And this in turn increases risk for coronary artery disease and development of stroke in the children.
But if you understand the physiology well, if you understand the genetic evaluation well, and you really go deep in terms of the karyotype results, you will know which disorders are more likely in that regards. You have mentioned very importantly the effect of genomic imprinting, which is there. So where you get that X chromosome which is intact from the father or the mother may also influence the manifestation. So it's a very disease which requires a multi-speciality input, and you need a careful protocol. So there are guidelines which are there. So this is from the Cincinnati guidelines, which really wonderfully focuses on when to do the evaluation, how to follow up. So we have got specific proforma. So all of you can have those proformas and put up in that so that you follow them up meticulously. The key aspects to look, of course, is of growth, blood pressure. And blood pressure, I would say, is very important because coarctation of aorta, dissection of aorta, they are all related to blood pressure. So blood pressure becomes very, very important. Thyroid profile and TTG, don't miss it. Often people consider starting growth hormone and they haven't done that. So that is not something which is acceptable, because that is, of course, very easily to treat. Look at metabolic complications around the 10-year mark, which is basically the puberty age group normally. which happens that way. Hearing, very important. If you have a girl with Turner syndrome who is deteriorating, who is not improving in terms of school performance, think of thyroid, think of hearing abnormalities in that perspective. Now, a lot of people think about the learning aspect as to what is affected and what is not affected in Turner syndrome. The intelligence is normal, but the performance may vary. They may be very good at language, but they may have some issues in terms of mathematical skills. They may have problems in communication. So they become more reliant, more dependent sort of a people. But overall, their intelligence is absolutely normal in that perspective. There can be some visuospatial issues. So they may find it difficult in terms of driving and those things, but otherwise learning is absolutely normal. I don't miss it. Cardiac, the most important, and we have done very well in terms of baseline. You have to do echocardiography, and after 12 years of age, MRI is very, very important to look at. And when you write a prescription, ask for what is the aortic size index, and less than 16 years of age, what is the SDS, because all your algorithm was based upon that. So you have to be wary about these parameters. Importantly, renal ultrasound, of course, at the baseline. Hip examination, that's more like a congenital problem, so you should pick it up early. That is like a CDH issues. Spine X-ray, if you're on growth hormone, you have to look for all these abnormalities and problems which happen in that regards. And bone density, don't rush. Do it only after you have achieved the sexual maturity, typically beyond 18-20 years of age, or if you have a fragility fracture in that regard.